Namaskar, welcome to this module on the planning grid. Hospitals come in all shapes and sizes. This diversity is meant to accommodate the flexibility and informal state of human life, where most of the times cues are taken from nature to build the right form. A planning grid is an architectural design tool which is a network of lines. Healthcare designers derive their planning grids at conceptualizing the overall design of the hospital. What is a planning grid? A planning grid is an overlay of lines usually represented by a long dash dot. They need not necessarily be horizontal and vertical, but they often are, and is a design tool used by us architects to create some kind of order on what is otherwise a chaotic, blank, white paper when they start to design a hospital building. Healthcare designers can derive their planning grids in one of the two of the following ways. In urban situations where the hospital takes the form of a vertical building comprising of a podium containing diagnostic, therapeutic and interventional services and a tower housing the inpatient facilities. The planning grid is largely determined by the layout of the inpatient tower. The modules used to determine the shape and size of this grid is the modules used to house the various kinds of inpatient facilities, that is rooms plus toilets conceptualized by the designer. Expanding on this, with the addition of excess corridors, stringing rooms out in a line as in the plan below, we see how the planning grids starts taking form. In the example given below, you can see how the planning grid modules in red of 3.9 meters into 8.5 meters is determined by the accommodation desired for a single bed patient room, a double bed patient room and their toilets. Let us see an example where we twist the entire inpatient tower block at an angle to the horizontal or vertical one. This is just one example of how the planning grid could almost be conceivable shape depending on what the designer wants to do with it. In vertically organized healthcare facilities, we design from the top inpatient tower to down the diagnostics, therapeutic and interventional podium. The structural grid need not necessarily be same as the planning grid, but is usually derived from it. In semi-urban or rural situations where the land available is very likely to be larger with respect to the built up areas desired, determining the planning grid is another ball game, one with much greater flexibility in the rules. In this situation, the planning grid will be determined by what the designers called as their concept of the hospital. This concept is also an ordering tool and will have to be used to determine the form of the hospital in even the previous example of urban site, but with less freedom. When there is a lot of land available, it gives the architect more elbow room and his hand is likely to move with more hopefully graceful abandon. This freedom enables many different types of building layouts and forms. Different parts of the hospital may have different planning grids derived from the functional planning requirements of the hospital's departments they house. Certain spaces in the hospital may be designed without using any geometrical planning grid at all. These areas are usually ancillary facilities such as auditoriums, entrance lobbies, or spaces in which patients are recuperating after treatment. Thank you. Namaskar. I hope you have understood the difference between a planning module, a planning grid, and a structural grid, and how do we use a top-down approach, a bottom-up approach, or flexibility in planning and designing of hospitals in the context of urban areas, rural areas, or tier 2 and tier 3 settings. Namaskar. Thank you.